Hello, everybody. I'm Antionette Kerr with Davidson Local, your hometown newspaper, davidsonlocal.com. And I am so excited. For those of you who know me, you know I'm a book nerd. And I have the honor of being able to interview Crystal Smith Paul about Did You Hear About Kitty Carr? And for some of you who know me, I'm not related because people call me Antoinette Carr all the time, Crystal, just so you know. And I say Kerr, but people call me Carr all the time. So it's really great. We have so much in common. I'm looking forward to being on stage with you on March 9th from 2 to 3 for our time together. And I also want to let people know a little bit about you the reason why I wanted to interview you, in addition to having a lot in common with your journalist, or you have journalist background and you're a writer, which I love writers. And I also know that you went to Spelman and graduated from UCLA. Is there anything else you want to share a little bit about your background? Because I know you have North Carolina
I do.
connections, and we want to hear
I was
about that.
actually born in Charlotte, born and raised, and my father is from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Some of the themes in Kitty Carr, it's Los Angeles and North Carolina, and that's because my mom is from Los Angeles, and I spent a lot of time, like really, I was raised bi-coastally between Los Angeles and North Carolina. My father moved there when I was 7. So, those roots go deep, but I feel like I've had, two very different experiences on both of
So
the
we are
coasts.
excited about having you come to Lexington and be here as a speaker. So Crystal and I will be on stage at the Black Box Theater, Arts 202, March 9th from 2 to 3, having a conversation about all sorts of things. One of the first things that I wanted to talk about is how you came into writing fiction, from journalism to writing fiction. That's a leap. How did you
Truthfully,
get there?
I've always wanted to write fiction. It was also kind of a career path that I didn't really see, truthfully, like how to get to. I've always been a very like avid reader, and actually writing a book, just I just wasn't really sure of the path to do it. I didn't know any other like novelist or anything like that for a clear path. And so, in thinking, I already had a film, degree for undergraduate. And so for my graduate degree, I was kind of like, okay, like, how can I blend this love of writing with something practical? And journalism, was the very like practical segue into my interest. However, once I started working in journalism, that's really when I came back to the fact of like what my love was. And I just decided to go ahead and, pursue that full time instead of doing journalism. Journalism, it didn't have enough of the creativity for me, is what I will say mostly. Um, and I really just, wanted to be able to create stories
We're
versus,
talking
kind
about
of chasing them.
people who were passing, which I think is something that not a lot of folks really dive into, that conversation about people passing. Can you share a little bit about that and how you came into
Sure.
that conversation?
So passing for me has always been a very interesting concept. I saw The Imitation of Life when I was about 5 years old. And I was very confused by Sarah Jane, that's the main character in that movie, by her choice to pass. And, really in that movie, she shunned, her mother. Um, and I don't know, it was just a very like interesting concept to me, being raised in the family that I was. The skin tones in my family, range, huge range. My mother's mother is very, very light skinned. She could have passed. My father is dark skinned. Like, we have all of these like varying colors like within my family. And so the concept of passing, being raised in North Carolina, being light skinned, there was always questions about my lineage and whether I was mixed or not. And that's something that really struck a chord in me, like always, in terms of the understanding, in terms of the understanding of our race in America and why we're so different skinned and colored, and this whole mixing of our race that happened during slavery and after. Um, so that's why the passing issue, it's not close to my heart. I don't know any family members who passed. It's more the sexual violence that is in my lineage. And so from there, when you think about that, and the rape of Black women, and during slavery, and the breeding of that, I always kind of said to myself, well, how does that impact the mother who has this child who can pass? Like, we always focus on the child, but we never think about the perspective of the mother, who was violated. And so that's really kind of my interest, more so than the actual like passing experience. It's the other side of that, in terms of like the loss, and what the mother daughter relationship is like, and how that moves forward in terms of opportunity.
For a lot of us, there is that trauma, and I know that you talk about that quite a bit, that and explore that with the characters in the book. Um, and you call it historical fiction, and so what part of that is historical and what part of that is fiction? We can go into detail when we have our conversation together, because
Yes.
I think that it is really interesting
Is
to
just
look at that.
the events in American history. So I have this shield of fiction that is peppered with real events that I imagined. And I would say, like, Kitty Carr is really like slanted historical fiction. There's a part in the book where, and again, not to give anything away, where our one of our main characters, she meets some other women in Los Angeles. And um, I'm trying to like think of a way to say this. Like, she meets some other women in Los Angeles, and it's really about the unity of women. That's like a huge theme also in The Imitation of Life, and how that gap can be bridged between the two is really like about the unity of women. And so it is mostly fiction, but that's what I would say, that the historical part comes in terms of the peppering of real events in American history, and just the story of segregation in this country
How did
and
you think about
marginalization.
writing from these different eras? Like, how did that
So
work for
I
you? What
think
was your
in
process?
pictures. So that's the first thing that I will say. And so trying to just really like imagine myself as the character is something that like I definitely do. It's just, I mean, it's a very slow process in terms of like getting to know your characters and really like who they are. Um, Kitty Carr is actually dedicated to my great grandmother and my two grandmothers. And I was very close to all three of them, but especially my great grandmother, who died, when I was 5. Um, and so I would say that I knew her so well, and in remembering the things that she taught me, and really, really just trying to. I mean, it's. I would say, like, in some ways, it's a bit of a spiritual experience. Like, when I'm writing, this book took me 10 years to write. So, truthfully, the story revealed itself to me over time. I didn't always know what Kitty Carr was going to be. The 2017 portion is really like my interest in celebrity, and trying to explain how this family like rose to prominence through the struggles of the people that came before them, to give them this like very cushy, wonderful life. So that part was easier to do because I've always been interested in celebrity. I've always read like celebrity interviews. So that part is like more poppy. And then really, I would say like the depth, comes through in the Kitty Carr part of the book. And that part, it's like that because it is based off of, my grandmothers and my great grandmother. And for them, like I knew them so well. So it's almost like, I don't know, kind of a transference maybe. Like I don't really know how it happens, but it's, when the story comes, like that's just, the voice that I would end up writing in. So it's it's just part of the process, and like really like leaning into where the story wants to go versus where you the writer wants it to go. And I really like surrendered myself to that process in terms of like, okay, well, this story wants to be told, and I'm going to sit back and, see how it
I
wants to
love
be
that
told.
idea, and we'll talk more about that on stage. I'd love to say that I had what I feel like, or I lived on a former plantation, and I had visitors, and people, thought that was strange, and they would say, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "They want to tell their stories." I don't know, and that's like that was my, and I'm not a fiction writer or some in most part a reader, but then that's when I learned about historical fiction because I thought these are stories that want to be told, and I wrote a story about a woman named Amanda Jane, and she exists. Then I found out she exists, and I was like, okay, well, then there's that. I went to the courthouse and found the document, and
Wow.
she wanted that story to be told. So sometimes in our historical
As
fiction,
you and I were
you
saying, like
just
so
don't
much of our
know.
history is, Black Americans is oral history. Like, you can kind of, even like when you look in the slave records, I mean, people are just like their first name, and, there might not be like, detailed records of like where they went or what happened to them. And it really is that oral history that allows us to like kind of piece together things. And then at a certain point, with me, like with fiction, it's just, me imagining and trying to like color in like the leaves of my family tree that, I'll probably never have the actual
Definitely,
answers
and I
to.
think that's part of the challenge as well. But I believe that our ancestors share with us, and that they've shared with you in some ways. I mean, it could
Thank
come
you.
from different places and things, but I feel like I can definitely tell when I'm writing something inspired by ancestors, and that they're like, "This is the story." You know, they used to pick out storytellers in different African and Caribbean cultures as well.
Absolutely.
So I think that's definite. Why did you want to come to Lexington, North Carolina?
And actually, one of the coordinators of the festival reached out to me like last year. Like, I want to even say it was probably even before Kitty Carr was actually out, because, the advance copies go out, to certain people, or it was right after. But the owner of the bookstore there, she asked me, to be at the festival. And, it's a huge honor. Like, when people like love your work and want to hear more about what you're doing. And then just Lexington, my grandmother is also from Winston-Salem. My dad is also from Winston-Salem. And Lexington has like delicious barbecue. And I love barbecue, and I've always known of the city of Lexington through my grandmother. So for me, it's like that connection, like getting like closer to those roots, and really having this experience of promoting Kitty Carr a little bit like closer to the family, that I have there, but also that is buried there. So for me, it's, something that I just
Okay, so I
definitely
look forward
wanted
to
to
seeing you
do.
on March 9th at 202 Main Street in Lexington. We'll be in the Black Box Theater. We'll be on the main stage from 2 to 3 p.m. And I look forward to our conversation.
Same. I can't wait. Thank you for speaking
Thank
with me today.